Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of Games Up podcast brought to you by World Geekly News. This week we will be going over all of the stories from the last 7 days, and our topic of the week will be Metroid 4 and how it's been impacted by its big news this week, but we'll get to that a little bit later. My name is Cameron, and I am one of your hosts, and his name is Lewis, and he is the other host.
Hello there. I'm Lewis, and I'm your host.
Ooh. Taking over from me. All right.
Yeah, you've had the limelight for too long, old man.
It's wow. Fair enough. But before we get into that, we have an occasional indie game of the week. Every now and then, one of us has played an indie game this week that we thought was so good we had to shout about it. And this week, it's me. So I have been playing a game with my favourite name this year. That is called Ding Dong XL.
Ding Dong XL.
Ding Dong XL. That's also the name I go by in certain clubs in Birmingham. And yeah, it's a really brilliant idea for a game. It's you know Frogger from back in the day. You cross the road back. So it's that, but it's a one-tap game. You initiate the cross and you have to make it to the other side and initiate the cross again. And it gets harder and harder, and it gets more kind of visually difficult and hard to see through. It's really difficult to explain why it's so good, but it's one of those games that's... Do you remember Pivot years ago?
Oh, yeah.
Where it was just one basic concept for the game of get the triangle through the thing, but it was tuned so perfectly that you couldn't stop playing it. Ding Dong is exactly that. It's a really simple idea when you put it down on paper, but it's tuned so perfectly that it's really difficult to put down. It's 70p on, I think, basically everything on mobile. It was like 33p on Steam this week. I've picked it up on mobile, and I will like ruin meetings by having a game in the middle of it. It's very addictive.
It looks really interesting.
It's really good fun. If you get it, you will have to keep track of scores.
Okay.
The game is developed and published by Nicovision Studios, and they are on Twitter and social media as well. All their handles and things will be in the description below. And yeah, it's just really, really good. Also, Nicovision Studios put the word XL at the end of every one of their games, which I love as an idea. So yeah, if you're looking for an indie game this week that will really grab a hold of you, I would highly recommend Ding Dong XL, and big old shout outs to Jared Petty for putting me onto that one from Kinda Funny. It's just really, really good. So, with that being said, let's get into the news. Your first story this week is a slightly tenuous one, but it's important because there's a lot of fans out there. The Harry Potter Wizards Unite has been delayed into 2019. The game that's coming from Niantic, who make Pokemon Go, has been delayed again into late this year. Niantic have had a lot of growth over the last few years. They've gone from like a couple 100 million company to their most recent valuation of 4 billion. They've opened more offices. They've like trebled their development team. So I'm kind of concerned about this delay because with the amount of money and force they're now able to put behind this, I would hope to see it in a healthier state. But ultimately, I hope it just means a better game when it comes out.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing to keep hold of, isn't it? I mean, I know Pokemon Go is not exactly unpopular, but one of the things I think that, obviously when it first came out, it generated a lot of hype, but it wasn't a great game, I guess, until a little bit later on. So maybe if that's the case, and that's what this will release as more complete, then that can only be good, but I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I get you for sure. It may well mean more stability in the kind of things that hampered Pokemon at launch. Secondly, this week, the Anthem beta has been released, and people are just about managing to get into it, although there's been some struggles. And generally, it seems fairly good. It's picking up a lot of praise for its gameplay. People are loving the kind of fly, freedomy, open world mechanics that the game has to offer. Although, on the other side of things, it's also picking up some complaints for its technical demands. Apparently, and I'm only going on what I've heard here, I haven't had the chance to play the game myself, but apparently the game runs like utter garbage on an original Xbox One, and some PCs are struggling to get 60 frames per second out of it other than on medium or low settings, which is kind of concerning for a game out in a few weeks' time.
Yeah, definitely. And especially when it's not running well on the consoles. That's I think the biggest thing to take away.
Mm. It's one of those things that it's another piece of evidence for the next generation as well. If those original consoles are now struggling to keep up, we said it would happen eventually, and I kind of hope Anthem isn't the first example of it, but something will be.
Yeah, but you've got to remember that, especially with what Anthem's aiming for, there's no doubt that it's going to be a cross-gen game.
Oh god, yeah, absolutely. That game is going to be like.
Because like you don't, I mean, just
There's
not just
to
because of its thing, but
that game for years.
You don't release like one of these like long-term 5 year support kind of games at the end of a generation, unless it's going to be on the next generation as well.
That would be so funny if they launched Anthem and then the next generation gets announced and EA are like, "Oh, guys, you could have told us."
Yeah.
Although one of the positive things about all of this is that usually a game finishes its kind of content development and then they work on squishing performance and bugs afterwards. And with that in mind, both Anthem and Far Cry New Dawn have both gone gold in the last 7 days. Far Cry comes out on February the 15th, and I believe Anthem is a little bit later. I think it's closer to March, right?
I believe so.
So that's pretty good signs for both of those games. Far Cry, of course, being a kind of large story game, I wouldn't expect it to have quite the struggle that Anthem will, but hopefully that means we see both of those games in a very healthy state when they release.
Hopefully. I mean, I think Far Cry won't have too many issues because it's based on kind of what's already there. Anthem, people are still finding some things, but I guess maybe they've got time.
Yeah, you're right there. I hope there's something new in Far Cry, like maybe a little gameplay system or a tweak to the world, because there's the car combat and stuff. So there's something that they might have to squish a bit. But I get what you mean. They've already kind of laid the groundwork there. And Anthem, I get the feeling is going to be one of those games that sort of has a bit of a bad reputation at launch for being a bit sort of unstable and stuff, but picks up as more people play it. And that's exactly what we're seeing with this beta of where, the first day, the first few hours were nothing but complaints about stability and not being able to get in, and now we're seeing more people flood into the game, and as that happens, they're able to sort of promote that stability throughout. So it's fairly typical for that kind of cycle. All right, number 4 this week is that Sea of Thieves gained surprising traction on Twitch this week, becoming the second most concurrently viewed game this week, second to Fortnite, of course, which continues to just utterly dominate. But it got pretty good numbers, which is good to see. It's good that this game from Rare, the kind of historic studio, is picking up, if nothing else, at least some decent mindshare. Apparently, we should also be expecting a development update for The Future and what comes after Sea of Thieves from Rare in the next few weeks. So that should be interesting to see whether this changes it at all, whether they seem to kind of capitalise on the mindshare that they've gained over the last few weeks. But either way, cool to see.
Yeah, it's cool to see, and I think I'm interested to see what Rare's going to be up to.
Yeah, I agree with you, especially as we kind of look to the next generation. Are Rare going to be one of the flag bearers for that console, or are they going to try and rest on the laurels of Sea of Thieves for a little bit? Do you think we see a Sea of Thieves for Xbox next?
Yeah, I think we do. I think
interesting.
I don't know. Like, I'm not very positive. I'll be honest.
No, I know.
Well, it's more just that like I'd like to see Rare making games that are like what they're famous for. But I get that they've obviously branched out, but they're a much different kind of team now. But I can see them doing a Sea of Thieves 2 or some sort of adaptation for the new consoles.
See, I can't.
No?
I see. Sea of Thieves is a weird one to me because I think it looks like quite a limited game. Not in that it's like it looks bad, but it doesn't look. It looks very this gen. Like, I don't know that it would, with the power of the next consoles and what I assume to be their kind of their strong point will be their networking and their kind of interconnectivity. I don't know that Sea of Thieves would hold up as well. I think they've done a really good job of pumping it with content to keep the audience there, but I get the feeling if they had the chance to... Maybe a Sea of Thieves 2, like the next version of it, but I can't see like a re-release or an up-resing for the next consoles. And finally, this week, Kingdom Hearts' initial wave of reviews have come out, and the game is generally being considered as good, if not great. Of course, take this with a pinch of salt. Every review is totally subjective, and you should find the people that you gel with best to see what things work. But yeah, it's good to see that a game that's taken this long and has so much hype behind it has not crumbled under the weight of its own franchise.
Yeah, I mean, it's always good when something that's, what's it, like 10 years in the making or more actually ends up being good. Because famously we have many examples of it not working out that way.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's super good to see.
Hopefully this sets a precedent for the other games like that out this year. You know, maybe Shenmue will turn out to be fantastic. Maybe what we see of Final Fantasy will be really good. Maybe this is the year for the kind of nostalgia comeback. Yeah,
sure. And it's I mean, this is kind of another thing, but it's good to see like a game come from Square recently that's doing really well, because Square have had some troubles, I think, in the past few years. Obviously, they release loads of things, but a lot of their things have been maybe lower rated. So it's good to see something come out that's actually really high.
Yeah.
Hopefully they can ride on whatever made that one good and kind of pump it somewhere else.
Well, it's really nice to see something AAA come out from them that has that. You know, they've managed to do some of the slightly more lower end 2D stuff like Octopath and so on and so forth that people didn't expect from them. But it's good to see that they've still got the chops to kind of throw a huge amount of budget at something and make it work.
Yeah.
And of course, the last piece of news this week, which is now our topic of the week, is that it's been revealed that Metroid Prime 4 is restarting development. Nintendo released a statement this week explaining what they were doing with Metroid Prime and why things were changing, and this is the statement. "We've decided to re-examine the development structure itself and change it," Takashi said, who is the new head developer. Specifically, we have asked the producer Kensuke Tanabe to work in trust and collaboration with the studio that developed the original Metroid Prime series, Retro Studios, in the United States, and restart development from the beginning. By collaborating and developing with Retro, we believe we can make this game something that will meet our fans' expectations. This is a really, really interesting move from Nintendo for a couple of reasons. The first reason is because it promotes crazy transparency, the kind that we don't really see very often from video games developers. It's only when major shifts happen like this that they get the chance to kind of openly talk about how development changes. And it's really good that Nintendo has taken the opportunity to do it. Secondly, it means we're getting another retro Metroid. That's quite hard to say. Another retro Metroid, which could be a good thing, but also could be a bad thing depending on how much you think the series needs to change going forward. But it also means that we probably don't see Metroid for a long while yet.
Yeah, no, it's going to be on the scale of years, for sure, if it's restarting now. It's it's a good move to be transparent, and that's for sure. But then at the same time, part of this is, it's good to see it from Nintendo as well, because they're famous for maybe being a bit too quiet when it comes to these kind of things. But also, like, it's a symptom, if you like, of revealing something so early. And I think we're going to see more of these, not necessarily from Nintendo, but more in general, because there's been quite a few things kind of teased in the last few years where it's just been kind of a title screen or something like that. I do wonder whether we're going to hear kind of more of these kind of stories of kind of restarting development or something along those lines.
I mean, firstly, yeah, I agree with you about it. It's really good to see it from Nintendo. I have to hope that they've kind of seen what's happened with some of their peers in the industry. I would imagine, especially Crackdown, and how a major first-party studio, first-party title has managed to kind of bungle it with where it was and the hype of it coming out. And yeah, you're right. I'm glad that I'd imagine they've learned from that and put it to good use. I am so disappointed that we won't see Metroid. Like, I don't really care about Metroid. I don't have much history with the franchise, but it was one of those things of Nintendo listening to people, and it was one of those things to me that signaled a slight change in Nintendo, because there's been the demand for it for such a long time, and they went, all right, we have a new console, we're doing better, we're giving you what you want. And if they'd had something, if they'd been able to show that the game was real and that people could, you know, actually look forward to it, and I guess they still can, but like if they'd been able to deliver on that hype train, it would have, I really think, cemented their place in the industry for the next year. Not that, you know, they don't have a place in the industry, but they've been competing really, really well, and they would have continued to compete really well with it. I think it's good that it's going to Retro. I think Retro have a proven track record with the series. I know a lot of people are thinking they don't want the same Metroid game that's come out the last few iterations to come out again. But I think if you give it to a studio that knows what they're doing with the franchise, then they still have the room to experiment, right? Like, you wouldn't give Retro to Platinum and then be surprised if it doesn't turn out great, because they've never made a Metroid game before. But if Retro they have the building blocks to do something new with it, and I think that is very exciting. It's a shame we won't see it, but it is really, really good that we're not seeing it for the right reasons at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a late, I guess, Metroid Prime is better than like a bad one at the end of the day.
Oh god, yeah, absolutely. Especially after how long people have wanted that game specifically.
Yeah, totally. I think that's just what you've got to keep in mind with all of this. But I mean, to make a move so big, you have to wonder what state the game was actually in, because like restarting development, you know, is like it's so bad that it fundamentally needs to change.
Yeah.
You know, like it all needs to be thrown away. Everything's wrong. You know, how bad was it? You know.
Well, also, like, what was it? Because I think that's the thing is it's been a long time really since we've had an actual Metroid Prime game. Like, we've had spin-offs and variations. We've had this, that, and the others. We've had the retro Metroids. We had that Metroid football game, I think. But we haven't had a real sort of core tentpole of the franchise for a while. And handing it to another studio, you've got to wonder, like, did the game resemble Metroid in any way? Like, would people have looked at it and gone, oh yeah, that's what we were wanting? I imagine, or I hope, although we hear them less for Nintendo, but I hope that over the next few months, maybe we hear from something like a Jason Schreier article, or something that kind of deep dives into what was going on and where it was going on. Honestly, it's those kind of inner workings of studios that I think to some extent are more interesting than some of the games they've put out. Like, the stories that have come out of Bethesda recently about why so many things are fucked as they are is so much more interesting than playing Fallout 76.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I'd really like to get the inside baseball on that and what was going on and why it shifted and you know what they plan to do differently. But I do think they're doing it for the right reasons. I think honestly the best thing to come out of all of this is just how transparent Nintendo are being, and if they can continue with that for anything else, you know, if Pokemon Generation 8 gets delayed, you know, I'd really respect the same thing from Nintendo if it was, you know, it's not working right, we need more time, we're going to shift it to these people, we need this director. Just being that open about what's going on is, as you say, something we don't get from Nintendo very often, and hopefully it signals a shift in their kind of attitude to talking to consumers.
Yeah, definitely. I do wonder about when we're going to see this game, though, because it's worth mentioning that many games that are in development, like they have like their kind of core development time, and then they've got like the initial working on engine stuff and stories and all that kind of stuff. I do wonder how big this restart is.
That's a good question.
Especially if it's going back to a studio who obviously don't have depending on what they're using, if they need to make their own engine for it, then that's going to be an interesting delay.
It's one of those things that we can only really speculate, but yeah, it is a very good question. Like, if it's a total start from scratch, we have nothing, then yeah, that's really concerning. But like, if it's a start from scratch in developer, but like maybe they can reuse the story, maybe some of the artwork can still be applied, maybe some of the visuals or some of they probably didn't get to voice recording, but maybe something of the casting or something like that could work. Hopefully that it's not just ripped entirely. And I've got to imagine that Retro, even if they don't have their own engine, they have the connections to kind of cobble together an engine fairly well. Like, I don't know. I mean, they put out something for Switch last year.
Yeah.
And it's a Donkey Kong game, so they probably can't use exactly the same engine, but they might be able to modify it.
Yeah, I guess you hope so. Because I like yourself, like I would like to see this game. I have quite fond memories actually of playing the first Metroid Prime. Although it was far too difficult for me, and I didn't end up anywhere in it. Yeah. It was actually quite a hard game. Yeah, no, I'd love to see it. And it's one of those ones that I guess it might be a bit too late when it actually happens. But it's one of the ones that if it was coming out would be kind of, getting me closer to buying the Switch. Yeah.
Do you know what I'll tell you, actually, having looked into it, what my biggest concern about all of this is. So the last thing that Retro put out was Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, which was a ported version from the Wii U to the Nintendo Switch. So they I believe, I'll double check here, but I believe they ported the game. They brought it out on the Wii U, then did a version of it and brought it out on the Switch. And that was, the original one came out 4 years ago, and the port came out last year, I believe. Which means that I would put money on Retro having worked on something in between those years. Like, 5 years for a Switch port is a long time. That would kind of seem like a B-team job. And Metroid Prime would seem like an A-team job. I would imagine there is a project in those 3-4 years that now we don't see, or has been shelved, or has been moved to somebody else. Like, what has Retro had to move around to take hold of this game?
Yeah, I get what you mean. You've got to imagine that something's going on, or something's being changed.
Yeah, you don't, because it's not like, they've been waiting for this, because they would have just given it to Retro to begin with. I don't know, that this is what I mean about like the inside baseball kind of thing. The stories of what has had to move and change and shift in place so that game comes out from that studio is almost more interesting than like the marketing of the game itself. Like, I'm all in for hype and jazz, and I can't wait to see what people pull off at E3 and all that kind of stuff. But learning about like the politics of a video game and what it is and how it gets made, I don't know, man. That's pretty fascinating, and I doubt we'll ever see what any of these things. But I kind of wish we could. There's a book in there somewhere if somebody wants to write it.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see behind the curtain.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think that wraps us up. That is a week's worth of video game news and a topic and an indie game. That is a Games Up podcast, I would say.
Yeah.
Very nice. What will you be playing this week?
So I've been playing the Resident Evil 2 remake.
Very
I'm
nice.
going to be playing it straight after this is finished. And yeah, no, it's really good. I think we'll hear it being talked about at the end of the year. And you know, like it's really kind of it's awful to want remakes. I think people, I don't know, people get kind of annoyed at not using original ideas, but at the same time, I kind of look at it and I'm like, you've taken something and then recrafted it with a lot of love. And so I'm really kind of hoping that we maybe see some other things from that generation remade.
Anything in particular?
Metal Gear Solid 1. That's probably the big one.
That's been a big rumor for a long time.
Yeah.
I wonder if we'll ever see it.
Nope. It's not like Konami have any like actual talent, so.
Fucking hell. I will be putting this down, and then I don't know. I'm playing Undertale on the Switch at the minute, and I'm in love with it. I love. I'm about an hour and a half into it, so I realise I haven't seen much of it, but I just love the tone of the game. It's so good. I guess I'll try and do more Assassin's Creed Odyssey, maybe. And I am going to be going really hard on competitive Overwatch to try and get myself up as best I can in time for the launch of the Overwatch League Season 2 in a couple of weeks, which I'm super fucking excited about. So yeah, that'll be me. I'm also going to put this podcast down, finish this up, and try and hunt for a shiny Psyduck. So that'll be us. Thank you very much for joining us. We hope that you enjoyed the show. And if you did, feel free to like it, subscribe to it, share it around, follow it on all the platforms so that we keep you and you keep us and you stay with us for all the other episodes so that a couple more people might find us and so we know what we're doing right or wrong for the future. It really helps. We are on all the socials. We are at Games Upcast on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, iTunes, Twitter, and now Spotify. I might have to find a better way of saying that now that we've got so many things that we're on. And we're brought to you by World Geekly News. We'll see you next week. And until then, the game is well and truly up.